Your brain is being rewired every single day, not by dramatic breakthroughs or rare moments of brilliance, but by the quiet choices you repeat without noticing: how you breathe when you are stressed, how you move when you feel tired, how you focus when distraction feels easier, and how you treat your own thoughts when no one is watching. What feels like personality or fate is often biology responding faithfully to your habits, shaping your focus, sharpening or dulling your memory, and deciding whether your mind will feel clear or crowded as the years pass. The habit begins in a place most people overlook, not in effort, not in intelligence, but in where the mind chooses to rest. Attention is not merely a mental preference, it is a biological act. Every time you decide to focus on one thing rather than many, small electrical signals move through specific neural pathways, strengthening them the way repeated footsteps carve a path into the ground. The brain does not understand intention as an idea, it understands it as repetition. What you return to again and again becomes easier, faster, and eventually automatic. Modern life encourages constant switching. Notifications, background noise, unfinished thoughts, and silent anxieties pull attention in multiple directions at once. From a biological perspective, this trains the brain to remain fragmented. Neural circuits that support deep focus weaken when they are rarely used, while circuits associated with scanning, reacting, and urgency grow dominant. This is not a moral failure or a lack of discipline, it is adaptation. The brain simply reorganizes itself around what it is repeatedly asked to do. When you choose single-task attention, even for a few minutes, a quiet shift begins. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, decision-making, and sustained concentration, becomes more active and more efficient. At the same time, unnecessary neural noise decreases. Fewer signals compete for dominance, and the brain experiences something it recognizes as safety. Focus, at its core, is a state in which the brain no longer feels the need to monitor everything at once. This is why deliberate attention often feels uncomfortable at first. The brain resists change, not because it is lazy, but because unfamiliar patterns require more energy. When you sit with one task and gently redirect your attention back each time it wanders, you are not fighting the brain. You are teaching it. Each redirection strengthens inhibitory control, the ability of the brain to quiet irrelevant signals. Over time, what once felt effortful begins to feel natural. Memory sharpens as a direct result of this process. Information cannot be stored clearly in a distracted brain. When attention is scattered, memory formation becomes shallow and unstable. Focus allows the hippocampus to encode experiences with greater precision, linking new information to existing knowledge networks. This is why moments of deep presence are often remembered vividly, while distracted days blur together without distinction. There is also a physiological rhythm to attention. When you focus deeply, brain waves shift into slower, more organized patterns associated with learning and insight. Stress hormones decrease, while neurotransmitters that support learning and motivation become more balanced. The body aligns with the mind, reducing internal friction. Focus becomes less about force and more about coherence. The compassionate truth is that wandering attention is not a personal flaw. It is the brain responding exactly as it was trained to respond. Rewiring begins not with harsh control, but with patience. Each moment of noticing distraction without judgment and returning to the present task sends a powerful signal to the nervous system. It says that this moment matters, that clarity is valued, that the brain does not need to stay on alert for everything at once. Over time, this habit reshapes identity. You begin to trust your mind again. Tasks feel less overwhelming, decisions become clearer, and mental fatigue softens. The brain learns that it can slow down without falling behind. Focus becomes a place you return to, not something you chase. In this way, attention is not something you possess, but something you practice. The brain listens carefully to how you use it, adapting silently and faithfully. Each choice to be present, however small, leaves a biological trace, gradually transforming scattered effort into steady clarity and fleeting moments into lasting memory. The habit of movement begins with an understanding that the brain was never designed to operate in stillness for long periods of time. Long before desks, screens, and chairs, the human nervous system evolved in motion, learning, remembering, and adapting while the body walked, climbed, reached, and explored. Movement is not separate from thinking, it is one of the oldest ways the brain knows how to stay awake, curious, and sharp. When the body moves, even gently, the heart increases its rhythm just enough to send more oxygen and nutrients toward the brain. This is not merely circulation, it is communication. Blood carries chemical messengers that tell brain cells to grow, connect, and protect themselves. With regular daily movement, the brain receives a steady signal that the environment requires alertness and adaptability. In response, it strengthens networks involved in attention, learning, and memory. What makes this habit powerful is its simplicity. Movement does not need to be intense or exhausting to be effective. A walk, a stretch, a slow climb of stairs. These actions stimulate areas of the brain responsible for coordination and spatial awareness, which are deeply connected to memory systems. As the body navigates space, the brain practices organizing information, predicting outcomes, and adjusting in real time. These same processes support mental clarity and focus. There is also a chemical shift that occurs with movement. The brain releases substances that encourage the growth of new neural connections and protect existing ones from damage. These chemicals create an internal environment where learning becomes easier and recall more reliable. Over time, regular movement builds a kind of biological resilience, helping the brain remain flexible rather than rigid, responsive rather than dull. Movement also plays a subtle role in emotional balance, which directly affects focus. A stressed or anxious brain struggles to concentrate because survival signals override cognitive ones. Gentle physical activity lowers stress hormones and activates calming pathways in the nervous system. This creates mental space, allowing attention to settle instead of scatter. In this calmer state, memory improves not through effort, but through ease. There is something deeply grounding about moving the body with awareness. Each step, stretch, or breath brings the mind back into the present moment. This embodied attention strengthens the connection between physical sensation and mental awareness. The brain learns to anchor itself in real experience rather than drifting into mental noise. Over time, this reduces rumination and mental fatigue, preserving energy for focused thinking. Movement also restores rhythm to the brain. Sitting for long periods disrupts natural cycles of alertness and rest, leading to sluggishness and fog. Brief moments of movement reset these rhythms, waking up neural circuits that may have gone quiet. The brain responds with renewed clarity, as if reminded of its original purpose. Perhaps most importantly, movement reinforces the idea that the brain is supported, not pressured. It communicates care rather than demand. When movement becomes a daily habit, it signals to the nervous system that health and awareness are priorities. This sense of internal safety allows the brain to invest energy in growth instead of defense. In this way, Movement becomes more than a physical action. It is a dialogue between body and brain, a reminder that cognition is not confined to the head. Each time the body moves, the brain listens, adapts, and sharpens itself in quiet response. Sleep is often misunderstood as a passive state, a simple pause in activity, when in reality it is one of the most dynamic and purposeful phases of brain function. When the body lies still and the mind drifts away from conscious thought, the brain enters a period of intense organization, repair, and refinement. What feels like absence is actually deep biological presence, a silent intelligence at work. As consciousness fades, the brain shifts its priorities. Energy that was spent on reacting, deciding, and filtering information is redirected inward. Networks involved in memory begin to replay patterns from the day, strengthening useful connections while allowing others to fade. This process is not random. The brain is constantly evaluating what matters, deciding which experiences deserve permanence and which can be released. Focus during waking hours depends on this nightly sorting. Without it, mental clarity begins to fracture. One of the most remarkable functions of sleep is its role in cleansing the brain. During deep sleep, spaces between brain cells expand slightly, allowing fluid to wash through tissue and carry away metabolic waste. These waste products, if allowed to accumulate, interfere with signaling and impair memory. Sleep becomes a kind of internal housekeeping, preserving the delicate environment required for sharp thinking and recall. Memory does not live in isolation within a single cell or region. It exists as a pattern distributed across networks. During sleep, these networks are reactivated in coordinated sequences, reinforcing connections that support learning. This is why information encountered before rest often becomes clearer after waking. The brain completes what waking attention begins, transforming fragile impressions into stable knowledge. There is also a recalibration that occurs in emotional centers of the brain. Sleep restores balance to systems that regulate mood and stress, preventing emotional overload from spilling into cognitive function. When sleep is insufficient, emotional signals grow louder, making it harder for attention to remain steady. A rested brain can distinguish importance from noise, allowing focus to remain intentional rather than reactive. The timing and consistency of sleep matter as much as its duration. The brain follows internal rhythms guided by light and darkness, patterns shaped by evolution. Regular sleep reinforces these rhythms, allowing hormones and neurotransmitters to rise and fall in harmony. This predictability reduces internal confusion, helping the brain transition smoothly between states of alertness and rest. When sleep is disrupted or shortened, the brain compensates by prioritizing survival functions over higher reasoning. Attention becomes scattered, memory unreliable, and decision-making impulsive. This is not weakness but protection. The brain conserves energy by narrowing its scope. Over time, chronic sleep loss dulls mental sharpness, not because the brain is failing, but because it is overwhelmed. Approaching sleep with respect changes its impact. Creating quiet, darkness, and regularity signals safety to the nervous system. These signals allow deeper sleep stages to emerge more fully. In these depths, the brain repairs microscopic damage, strengthens important connections, and prepares itself for the demands of the next day. Sleep is also an act of trust. It requires letting go of control, allowing the brain to do what it has evolved to do without interference. In that surrender, focus is restored not through effort, but through alignment with biological wisdom. In honoring sleep, You honor the brain's natural intelligence, allowing clarity and memory to return as a consequence of care rather than force. The habit of deliberate learning begins the moment the mind encounters something it does not immediately understand. There is a subtle discomfort in that moment, a quiet tension between what is familiar and what is not. The brain notices this gap and responds with heightened alertness. Curiosity, from a biological perspective, is a signal that growth is possible. When the mind leans into that signal instead of retreating, neural systems responsible for adaptation come alive. Learning that stretches the mind activates regions involved in problem-solving, pattern recognition, and memory integration. These areas communicate with chemical messengers that encourage the brain to form new connections. This process is not instant. It unfolds gradually as the brain tests, adjusts, and reinforces pathways. The slight struggle is not an obstacle, it is the very mechanism through which rewiring occurs. When learning feels too easy, the brain remains unchanged. Familiar tasks rely on established circuits that require little energy. Challenging learning, however, signals that existing pathways are insufficient. In response, the brain releases substances that support flexibility and growth. This biological response is the foundation of cognitive resilience. The brain becomes better not because information is absorbed, but because it is reorganized. Deliberate learning also strengthens focus. Engaging with something just beyond comfort requires sustained attention. The brain learns to remain with complexity instead of escaping into distraction. Over time, this trains attention to hold steady under pressure. Focus becomes less fragile, more enduring, and less dependent on external stimulation. Memory benefits deeply from this process. When new information is actively engaged rather than passively consumed, it integrates more effectively with existing knowledge. The brain looks for meaning, connections, and relevance. These associations anchor memory, making recall easier and more reliable. Learning becomes an act of construction rather than storage. There is also an emotional dimension to learning that challenges. Success after effort releases signals of reward and motivation. The brain associates persistence with satisfaction, reinforcing the desire to engage again. This creates a positive feedback loop where curiosity fuels focus, focus deepens learning, and learning strengthens confidence. Avoidance of challenge has the opposite effect. When the brain is shielded from difficulty, it adapts by narrowing its range. Flexibility decreases, and unfamiliar situations feel threatening rather than intriguing. Over time, this limits mental agility and dulls memory. The brain is not failing, it is conserving energy in an environment that no longer asks for growth. Deliberate learning does not require constant intensity. Small, consistent challenges are enough. Learning a new concept, practicing a skill slightly beyond mastery, or questioning assumptions introduces novelty. These moments tell the brain that adaptation still matters. With repetition, the brain remains plastic, capable of change well into later life. There is a quiet humility in deliberate learning. It requires admitting that one does not know, and trusting the brain's capacity to grow. This humility reduces fear of mistakes, allowing exploration rather than defense. In this open state, learning flows more naturally, and focus stabilizes without force. Through deliberate learning, the brain stays alive to possibility. It remembers not because it is forced to, but because it is engaged. Focus sharpens not through pressure, but through purpose. The mind remains flexible, curious, and capable of renewal with each new challenge embraced. The habit of emotional regulation begins with recognizing that the brain does not separate thoughts from feelings in the way we often imagine. Emotion is not a background experience, it is a biological signal that shapes attention, memory, and decision-making. When emotional intensity rises unchecked, the brain shifts into a protective mode. Resources are diverted away from focus and learning toward vigilance and survival. Understanding this shift changes how we relate to our inner state. Stress is not inherently harmful, but chronic stress alters the chemical environment of the brain. Elevated stress signals interfere with memory formation and weaken the circuits responsible for concentration. The brain becomes reactive, scanning for threat rather than meaning. In this state, focus feels fragile and memory unreliable. Emotional regulation is not about suppressing feeling, but about restoring balance so the brain can return to its natural rhythm. Breathing plays a central role in this process. Slow, deliberate breathing sends signals through the nervous system that safety is present. These signals quiet overactive stress responses and activate pathways associated with calm awareness. As breathing deepens, heart rhythms stabilize, and brain activity becomes more organized. This physiological shift creates the conditions required for clear thinking and steady attention. Reflection adds another layer of regulation. When thoughts and emotions are observed rather than resisted, their intensity often softens. The brain learns that internal experiences can be witnessed without immediate reaction. This reduces emotional volatility and strengthens circuits involved in self-control. With practice, the mind becomes less entangled in passing states, preserving energy for focus and memory. Emotional regulation also protects the brain from exhaustion. Constant emotional reactivity drains cognitive resources, leaving little capacity for learning or recall. By pausing and acknowledging emotional signals, the brain conserves energy. This conservation is not avoidance, it is efficiency. A regulated brain uses its resources wisely, responding rather than reacting. Compassion toward oneself is a crucial element of this habit. Harsh self-judgment amplifies stress signals, reinforcing defensive patterns. Gentle acceptance, on the other hand, calms the nervous system. The brain responds to kindness as a form of safety, allowing cognitive functions to operate without interference. Focus improves not because pressure is applied, but because resistance dissolves. Over time, emotional regulation reshapes identity. The brain learns that it can experience intensity without being overwhelmed. This confidence reduces fear of challenge and uncertainty. Focus becomes more stable because it is no longer constantly disrupted by internal alarms. Memory strengthens because attention remains present long enough to encode experience. This habit also deepens awareness of the connection between mind and body. Emotional signals often manifest physically through tension, breath, or posture. Attending to these sensations grounds the mind in the present moment. The brain integrates sensory input with emotional context, creating coherence rather than fragmentation. In regulating emotion through calm attention and compassionate awareness, the brain is reminded of its capacity for balance. Focus and memory emerge naturally when internal systems are aligned, not strained, allowing clarity to arise from steadiness rather than effort.